Ladies and gentlemen, if you are enjoying my videos, please click the like button. It is the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would be very grateful to you. As dusk settled over the dense forest, casting long, eerie shadows across the underbrush, Sirotkin and his group found themselves at the heart of a deepening mystery. The forest, usually teeming with life, was unsettlingly quiet, the only sound being the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. The group had been following a well-trodden path, a familiar route used by hunters and travelers alike, but their journey came to an abrupt halt when they encountered an unusual and foreboding sight. A massive tree, its roots gnarled and twisted like the hands of an ancient crone, lay sprawled across the trail. It was as if the forest itself had conspired to block their way, the tree's thick trunk stretching out like a barrier, preventing further passage. The sight of the fallen tree filled the group with an inexplicable dread, a gnawing sense of unease that gnawed at their nerves. Sirotkin, the leader, approached the tree cautiously, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and a cold breeze whispered through the branches, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. "This wasn't here the last time we passed through," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. The rest of the group, a motley crew of rough and ready individuals, exchanged uneasy glances. There was something unnatural about the way the tree had fallen, something deliberate and sinister. They could all feel it, a palpable tension that hung in the air, like a shroud. "Could be the Ottoman," suggested Ivan, a burly man with a thick beard and a scar running down his cheek. "They've been known to set traps for unwary travelers." "Or it could be something worse," whispered Yuri, the youngest member of the group, his eyes wide with fear. "I've heard stories about this forest. They say it's haunted, that strange creatures roam these woods at night." Sirotkin silenced them with a raised hand, his expression grim. He knew the forest well, and while he didn't believe in ghost stories, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Enough," he said firmly. "We'll make camp here for the night. Keep your eyes open and stay alert. Whatever's out there, we'll face it together." As the group set about making camp, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The fallen tree had unsettled them all, and their nerves were frayed. The small fire they built did little to dispel the encroaching darkness, the flames casting flickering shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent intent. As they huddled around the fire, the conversation inevitably turned to the potential threats they faced. The Ottomans were a real and present danger, their scouts often seen prowling the outskirts of the forest, but there were other, more insidious threats lurking in the darkness. Whispers of mythical creatures and ancient curses filled the air, each tale more terrifying than the last. "Do you really think it was the Ottomans?" asked Maria, a fierce and determined woman with eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. "Or is there something else at play here?" Ivan shrugged, his face set in a grimace. "Who knows? But I don't like it. Feels like we're being herded, like sheep to the slaughter." Yuri shivered, pulling his cloak tighter around his shoulders. "I told you, there are stories about this place. My grandmother used to say that the forest was alive, that it had a will of its own. She said that those who ventured too deep never returned." "Enough with the ghost stories," snapped Sergei, a veteran soldier with a stern demeanor. "We need to focus on what we can see and hear, not on old wives' tales." But despite Sergei's admonition, the fear and tension only grew. Each crack of a twig, each rustle of leaves, seemed amplified in the oppressive silence of the forest. The group's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, and it was only a matter of time before something, or someone, snapped. As the night wore on, Sirotkin couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He stared into the darkness beyond the firelight, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, ready for whatever might come. In the depths of the forest, unseen eyes watched them with a cold, calculating gaze, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The forest held its breath, and the group huddled together, united by their fear of the unknown. The emerging threat was real, and it was closer than any of them dared to imagine. The night deepened, and the forest seemed to close in around the camp. The flickering firelight illuminated the wary faces of Sirotkin and his companions, casting long shadows that danced and twisted like phantoms in the night. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. In times of uncertainty and fear, people often turned to their faith for comfort and protection. Sirotkin and his group were no different. They had faced danger before, but there was something about this forest, about the eerie stillness and the feeling of being watched, that shook them to their core. Maria, her eyes wide with apprehension, reached for the small crucifix hanging around her neck. She kissed it gently before making the sign of the cross, her lips moving in silent prayer. "Holy Mother, protect us," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackle of the fire. Seeing Maria's gesture, Ivan followed suit. His rough exterior belied a deep-seated faith, and he too crossed himself, muttering a prayer for divine protection. "Saint Nicholas, guide us through this darkness," he said, his voice a low rumble. One by one, the others joined in, each seeking solace in their religious beliefs. Yuri clutched a worn prayer book, its pages yellowed with age, and began to recite passages from memory. Sergei, despite his stern demeanor, bowed his head and whispered a prayer for strength and courage. Sirotkin, though not particularly devout, felt a sense of unity and calm as he watched his companions draw strength from their faith. He crossed himself more out of solidarity than conviction, but the simple act brought a measure of comfort. The forest might be filled with unseen threats, but here, around the fire, they were together, and their shared beliefs gave them a fragile sense of security. As the group huddled closer, their whispered prayers mingling with the night air, a strange feeling washed over them. It was as if the forest itself was listening, the ancient trees bearing silent witness to their supplications. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly, the shadows retreating just a little from the circle of firelight. For a moment, the fear that had gripped their hearts eased, replaced by a fragile hope. Whatever lay in wait beyond the firelight, they faced it together, their faith a beacon in the encroaching darkness. As the night wore on, the tension in the camp remained palpable. Sirotkin's group was not alone in the forest. Not far from their camp, the commissar and his subordinates were also navigating the dark woods, their presence marked by a different kind of unease. The commissar, a man of stern authority, had sensed the growing threat in the forest and was determined to maintain control and protect his men. The commissar's group had set up a perimeter, their disciplined efficiency a stark contrast to Sirotkin's ragtag band. Soldiers patrolled the area, their eyes sharp and their weapons at the ready. The commissar, a tall, imposing figure, stood at the center of the camp, his gaze piercing the darkness as if daring it to challenge his authority. "We can't afford to let our guard down," the commissar said, his voice firm and commanding. "There's something out there, and it's more than just the Ottomans. We need to be prepared for anything." His subordinates, seasoned soldiers hardened by countless battles, nodded in agreement. They had faced many dangers, but there was something about the forest that unsettled even the most battle-hardened among them. The stories of haunted woods and vengeful spirits were hard to dismiss when the night seemed alive with unseen eyes and whispered threats. The commissar, sensing the unease among his men, knew he had to maintain their morale. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. It was a collection of prayers and invocations, a source of strength in times of peril. "Let us not forget that we are protected by more than just our weapons," he said, opening the book. "Our faith is our shield, our belief our armor." He began to read aloud, his voice steady and strong, the familiar words of the prayers filling the night air. His men, though hardened warriors, bowed their heads in respect, their own faith renewed by the commissar's unwavering conviction. As the prayers continued, the atmosphere in the commissar's camp changed. The oppressive weight of the forest seemed to lighten, the darkness held at bay by the power of their collective belief. The soldiers felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination, their fears quelled by the strength of their faith and the authority of their leader. The commissar closed the book and looked around at his men, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "We will face whatever comes," he said, his voice ringing with confidence. "Together, with our faith and our strength, we will prevail." The forest around them remained dark and silent, but the men stood taller, their resolve fortified. The clash with the unknown was imminent, but they were ready. With the commissar's leadership and their shared belief, They would face the threats lurking in the shadows, their authority and faith guiding them through the night's terrors. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the night deepened, the stillness broken only by the occasional crackling of the campfire. Sirotkin and his group, huddled close for warmth and comfort, listened intently as the commissar began to speak. His voice was low and somber, carrying the weight of age-old fears and superstitions. "These woods are ancient," the commissar began, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Older than any of us can imagine. And with age comes stories, myths, and legends passed down through generations, each one more terrifying than the last." The group leaned in, their faces illuminated by the firelight, eager to hear what the commissar had to say. He was a man of authority and experience, and his words carried a gravity that none could ignore. "Many believe that the forest is alive," he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. "That it has a will of its own. There are tales of creatures that dwell within spirits and beings that guard its secrets. Some say they are the souls of those who died here, unable to find peace, forever bound to the woods." Yuri, the youngest of the group, shivered involuntarily. "What kind of creatures?" he asked, his voice trembling. The commissar glanced around the circle, his gaze lingering on each face. "There are many stories," he said slowly. "One speaks of the Leshy, a guardian of the forest. He's said to be a giant of a man, covered in moss and leaves, with eyes that glow like embers. The Leshy is a protector, but also a trickster. He can lead travelers astray, making them lose their way, never to return." Maria crossed herself, whispering a quick prayer. The thought of such a creature watching them from the shadows was unsettling. "Do you believe these stories?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The commissar sighed, his expression unreadable. "Belief is a powerful thing," he said. "Whether these creatures are real or not, the fear they instill is very real. And in a place like this, fear can be just as dangerous as any physical threat." He paused, letting his words sink in. The fire crackled, and the forest seemed to draw closer, as if listening to the tales being told. "Then there are the stories of the Rusalka," he continued, "water spirits that lure men to their deaths with their haunting songs, and the Baba Yaga, an old witch who lives in a hut on chicken legs, preying on the unwary." The mention of Baba Yaga sent a chill through the group. They had all heard stories of the witch in their childhoods, tales meant to keep them from wandering too far from home. But here, in the heart of the forest, those stories seemed all too real. The commissar leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We must respect the forest and its inhabitants, whether we believe in them or not. For in this place, where the line between myth and reality blurs, our survival depends on our caution and respect." The night grew colder, and the group huddled closer together, drawing comfort from each other's presence. The fire's warmth was a small barrier against the encroaching darkness, but the stories of the commissar had left them uneasy. They needed answers, or at least a way to understand the strange occurrences in the forest. It was then that the old man Matvey spoke up. He was a seasoned traveler, his face lined with the marks of many years and many journeys. His eyes held a deep wisdom, and when he spoke, the others listened. "There is one place," Matvey began, his voice gravelly and low, "a place that even the bravest dare not go. An island in the middle of the bog, shrouded in mist and mystery. They say it holds untold treasures, but no one who has ventured there has ever returned." The group exchanged nervous glances. The thought of an island, hidden within the treacherous bog, was both intriguing and terrifying. "What kind of treasures?" Ivan asked, his curiosity piqued. Matvey shrugged, his expression grave. "Gold, jewels, ancient artifacts, who can say? The stories vary, but all agree on one thing: the island is cursed. It is said to be guarded by the spirits of those who died seeking its riches, and by the Leshy himself, who protects the forest and its secrets." Yuri, always eager for adventure, leaned forward. "But if no one has returned, how do we know these stories are true?" The old man smiled a sad, knowing smile. "Because there are always those who think they can succeed where others have failed. They hear the stories, the warnings, but greed blinds them. And so they go, never to be seen again. The only evidence of their fate are the whispers carried by the wind and the occasional glint of gold seen through the mist." Maria shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Why would anyone risk such a fate, she asked. Matvey looked into the fire, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Desperation, greed, a desire for glory, many reasons. But the result is always the same. The island is a siren's call, promising riches but delivering only death. The group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The forest, with its hidden dangers and ancient mysteries, seemed even more menacing now. The tales of the cursed island and its treasures added a new layer of fear to their already frayed nerves. Sirotkin, sensing the growing unease, spoke up. "We won't be going to any island," he said firmly. "Our goal is to find a way out of this forest and return home safely. Let's not be tempted by stories of gold and treasure." The others nodded, relieved by his decisiveness. But even as they agreed, the allure of the island lingered in their minds, a tantalizing mystery that whispered of danger and riches. In the heart of the forest, where myths and legends held sway, anything seemed possible, and the line between reality and superstition grew ever thinner. As the fire crackled and the forest seemed to listen with bated breath, a heated discussion erupted among the group. The old man Matvey's stories about the Leshy and the cursed island had sparked a debate that revealed the deep divisions within the group. Yuri, his eyes gleaming with excitement, was the first to speak. "I think there might be some truth to these legends. The forest is so ancient and mysterious, who's to say what really exists out there? Maybe the Leshy is real, and maybe he does guard a treasure." Ivan snorted in disbelief. "Come on, Yuri. You're a grown man, not a child to be scared by fairy tales. These stories are just that, stories. There's no Leshy, no cursed island, just our imaginations running wild because we're lost and scared." Maria, always the peacemaker, tried to find a middle ground. But what if there is some truth to them? Maybe not in the literal sense, but in the way that these legends reflect the dangers of the forest. The Leshy could be a metaphor for the real threats we face here. Sergei, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, his expression serious. "Legends often have a basis in reality. They're warnings, passed down through generations. Disregarding them entirely might be foolish. We need to respect the forest and its stories, whether we believe in them or not." Yuri nodded vigorously. "Exactly. Even if the Leshy isn't real, the idea of a guardian of the forest could be based on something tangible. Maybe it's a way to explain natural dangers, like getting lost or encountering wild animals." Ivan shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "This is ridiculous. We're grown men and women, not superstitious villagers. We need to focus on finding a way out of here, not chasing shadows and myths." The debate raged on, with each side presenting arguments both for and against the existence of the supernatural elements in the forest. The tension in the air was palpable, the fear and uncertainty amplifying their emotions. Sirotkin, who had been listening quietly, finally raised his hand for silence. "Enough," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Whether we believe in these legends or not, we need to stay focused. Our goal is to survive and find a way out of this forest. Let's respect each other's views and work together." The group fell silent, the fire casting long shadows on their faces. The debate had revealed the underlying fears and beliefs of each member, but it had also brought them closer together. They were bound by their shared struggle, and in the darkness of the forest, they would need to rely on each other more than ever. The discussion about superstitions naturally led to a conversation about faith and the power of religious symbols. The forest, with its eerie stillness and hidden threats, had a way of making even the most skeptical among them turn to something greater for comfort and protection. Maria, still clutching her crucifix, spoke softly. "In times like these, our faith can be a source of strength. This cross," she said, holding it up, "reminds me that we're not alone. It's a symbol of hope and protection." Sergei nodded, his own crucifix visible beneath his shirt. Religious symbols have always been a way to ward off evil and bring comfort. They represent something larger than ourselves, something that can give us courage. Ivan, who had been vocal about his disbelief in superstitions, looked thoughtful. "I may not believe in ghosts or forest spirits, but I do believe in the power of faith. There's something about holding on to a symbol, like a cross, that can provide a sense of security, even if it's just psychological." Yuri, ever curious, asked, Do you think these symbols can actually protect us from the dangers of the forest? The commissar, who had been listening with a stern expression, finally spoke. Faith and symbols have power because we give them power. Whether it's a cross or a legend, these things can influence our minds and our actions. In a place like this, where fear and uncertainty reign, having something to believe in can make all the difference. Maria smiled, her grip on the crucifix tightening. That's exactly it. It's not just about the symbol itself, but what it represents. It's a reminder of our beliefs, our strength, and our resilience. Sirotkin, who had been quietly observing the conversation, added, "Our faith and our symbols can help us stay grounded. Whether it's a cross or a shared story, they give us something to hold on to when everything else feels uncertain." The group fell into a contemplative silence, each person reflecting on their own beliefs and the symbols they held dear. The forest, with its looming shadows and whispered threats, seemed to press in on them, but the shared conversation about faith and symbols provided a moment of respite, a brief sanctuary from the fear that gripped their hearts. In the darkness, surrounded by the unknown, their faith and their symbols became beacons of light, guiding them through the night. Whether they believed in the legends of Valeshy or not, they knew that their unity and their shared beliefs were their greatest strengths. And as long as they held on to those, they would face whatever the forest had in store with courage and hope. As dawn broke, the forest began to stir, the early morning light casting long, eerie shadows across the dense underbrush. The group, still shaken from the night's discussions, prepared to continue their journey. Sirotkin, taking the lead, scanned the area for the path they had followed the previous day, but to his astonishment, it was gone. "Where's the path?" he muttered, turning in a slow circle. The others gathered around, confusion mirrored on their faces. "We came this way," Ivan insisted, pointing to where the path should have been. "I remember that twisted tree. It was right by the trail." But the trail had vanished, swallowed by the forest. No matter how hard they searched, they could find no trace of it. The realization settled over them like a heavy fog. They were lost. Tensions mounted as they argued about which direction to take. The forest, once seemingly navigable, now appeared a labyrinth of identical trees and impenetrable thickets. As they pushed deeper into the woods, hoping to find a familiar landmark or the path itself, they stumbled upon something entirely unexpected: a house. The building seemed to materialize out of thin air, its weathered boards and broken windows stark against the surrounding greenery. It was an old, dilapidated structure, half hidden by the encroaching forest. Vines crept up its sides, and the roof sagged ominously. "What is this place?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. "Impossible," muttered Matvey, shaking his head. "There shouldn't be any houses out here. We're too deep into the forest." Despite their better judgment, curiosity drew them closer. The house had an unsettling presence, as if it were watching them, waiting. The door, slightly ajar, creaked ominously in the breeze. "Maybe we should look inside," Yuri suggested, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. Sirotkin hesitated, but finally nodded. "Stay together. Be careful." They entered the house cautiously, the floorboards groaning under their weight. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay. The furniture, draped in cobwebs, looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light that pierced through the broken windows. Ivan pointed to a table in the corner. "Look at this." On the table was a half-burned candle, still in its holder, and a book, its pages yellowed with age. The book was open, its text written in an unfamiliar language. "Who lived here?" Maria wondered aloud, running her fingers over the dusty cover of the book. "No one recently," Sergei replied, glancing around uneasily. "But it feels like they just stepped out and never came back." The group exchanged nervous glances, the sense of being watched intensifying. They backed out of the house, the forest outside seeming almost welcoming in comparison. "Let's keep moving," Sirotkin said. "We need to find the path and get out of here." But as they ventured further into the forest, the feeling of unease only grew. The house, the disappearing path, nothing made sense. The forest seemed to be playing tricks on them, warping reality itself. The disappearance of the path and the mysterious house left the group on edge. The forest, once merely a backdrop to their journey, had become an active player in their nightmare, manipulating their surroundings and heightening their fear. The sense of uncertainty gnawed at them. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a twig set their nerves on edge. They spoke in hushed tones, afraid to disturb the oppressive silence that surrounded them. "What if we're not alone out here?" Yuri whispered as they walked. "What if something's watching us?" "Don't be ridiculous," Ivan snapped, though his eyes darted nervously around. "There's no one out here but us." Maria clutched her crucifix, silently praying for guidance and protection. The uncertainty was eating away at her resolve. "We need to stay calm," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Panicking will only make things worse." But calm was a luxury they could not afford. Every step they took seemed to lead them deeper into the unknown. The trees, so similar and unyielding, became a maze with no exit in sight. Time seemed to stretch and warp, and soon they could no longer tell how long they had been walking. Suddenly, Sergei froze, holding up a hand to halt the group. "Do you hear that?" They strained their ears, but heard nothing unusual. "I don't hear anything," Sirotkin said, frowning. "Exactly," Sergei replied. "The birds, the insects, everything's gone silent." A shiver ran through the group. The forest, once alive with the sounds of nature, now held an ominous silence. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting. "We need to keep moving," Sirotkin urged, trying to mask his own fear. "Staying in one place isn't helping." But as they continued, the sense of dread only deepened. The forest seemed to close in around them, each step an effort against an unseen force. The unknown pressed on their minds, turning every shadow into a potential threat. They stumbled upon another clearing, and what they saw made their blood run cold. Another house, identical to the first. "How is this possible?" Maria whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "It's like we're going in circles," Ivan said, his voice trembling. "But we've been walking in a straight line." Panic began to set in. The sense of being trapped, of the forest itself conspiring against them, became overwhelming. Sirotkin tried to keep everyone calm, but the uncertainty and the eerie phenomena they were experiencing were too much. "We have to stay together," he said firmly. "We can't let this forest break us. We'll find a way out. We have to." But as they huddled together in the clearing, the oppressive silence in the looming trees seemed to whisper otherwise. The threat of the unknown was all around them, and their fear was a palpable presence, feeding the forest's malevolent energy. In the heart of the wilderness, surrounded by the inexplicable and the terrifying, the group's resolve began to fray. The forest, with its secrets and its silent threats, became a living nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. As the group trudged through the dense forest, their spirits were low, and exhaustion weighed heavily on their limbs. The strange and sinister occurrences had taken a toll on their resolve. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made them jump, nerves frayed by the oppressive atmosphere of the woods. Just as despair began to settle in, they stumbled upon a shocking sight: a house. But this one was different from the others they had encountered. It looked recently inhabited. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the faint aroma of cooked food wafted through the air, an almost surreal contrast to their dire situation. "Do you see that?" Ivan whispered, pointing towards the house, his voice barely concealing his disbelief. "It looks like someone lives here," Maria said, her eyes wide with surprise. "How can that be possible in the middle of this forest?" "We need to be cautious," Sirotkin warned, his eyes narrowing. "This could be a trap." Despite their wariness, curiosity and desperation drove them forward. As they approached the house, they noted the well-tended garden and the sturdy construction. It was clear that someone had been taking care of the place, but the question of who and why loomed large in their minds. Sirotkin gestured for the group to stay back as he cautiously approached the front door, his hand resting on his revolver. He knocked firmly, the sound echoing ominously in the stillness. For a moment, there was no response, and the group exchanged anxious glances. Then, the door creaked open, revealing a man standing in the doorway. His appearance was a jarring contrast to their expectations. The man in the doorway was tall and imposing, dressed in a pristine officer's uniform. His eyes were sharp, and a well-maintained beard framed his stern face. He held a rifle with a practiced ease, the kind that suggested he was no stranger to danger. "Who are you?" Sirotkin demanded, his voice steady but filled with suspicion. The man looked them over, his expression unreadable. "I am Ataman Alexander Zdansky," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "What brings you to this forsaken part of the forest?" The group exchanged bewildered looks. An Ataman here, in the depths of the forest? It made no sense. "We are lost," Sirotkin admitted, his grip on his revolver tightening. "We've been wandering for days and strange things have been happening. We found this house and hoped for some help." Zdansky nodded slowly, as if considering their words. "You are not the first to become lost in these woods," he said finally. "The forest has a way of playing tricks on those who enter it. But you must understand, this house is my refuge, and I am wary of strangers." "We mean no harm," Maria interjected, stepping forward with her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're just trying to find a way out of here." The Ataman's eyes softened slightly, but his guard remained up. "Come inside," he said after a pause. "We will talk, and perhaps I can offer some assistance. But be warned, the forest is not the only danger here." As they stepped inside the house, the warmth and the smell of food provided a stark contrast to the cold, damp forest outside. The interior was simple but well kept, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a table set with bread and soup. Zdansky motioned for them to sit. "Eat," he said. "You look like you need it." The group hesitated, but hunger and exhaustion won out. They sat at the table, their eyes constantly flicking to the Ataman as they ate. "So, what's the story with this forest?" Ivan asked between bites, unable to contain his curiosity any longer. Zdansky's expression darkened. "The forest is cursed," he said simply. "It ensnares those who enter, leading them in circles until they lose all hope. Legends speak of ancient spirits and malevolent forces, but I have seen enough to believe there is something very real and very dangerous out there." The group's unease deepened at his words. They had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed by someone living in the forest added a new layer of fear. "Why do you stay here?" Sergei asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. The Ataman's eyes grew distant. "This place, it holds a certain power. I am here for my own reasons, reasons that you might not understand. But for now, consider this house a sanctuary. Rest and regain your strength. You will need it if you are to find your way out." The group exchanged wary glances but nodded in agreement. For the moment, they were safe, and the warmth of the house and the presence of Ataman Zdansky provided a fragile sense of security amidst the unknown horrors of the forest. As they settled in, the tension in the air remained palpable. The mystery of the forest and the enigmatic Ataman hung over them like a shroud, a constant reminder that their ordeal was far from over. The warmth of the house and the presence of Ataman Zdansky provided only a temporary respite from the tension that had been gnawing at the group. As they sat around the table, the flickering firelight casting long shadows on the walls, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Sirotkin's keen instinct sensed that something was amiss. The Ataman had been hospitable, but there was a guardedness in his demeanor, an undercurrent of tension that belied his calm exterior. The conversation turned to the forest and its many dangers. Zdansky spoke of the cursed land, the spirits that haunted it, and the countless souls who had been lost, never to return. But as he spoke, Sirotkin noticed a subtle shift in the Ataman's gaze, a quick flicker of his eyes towards the ceiling. Something was up there. With a nod to Ivan, Sirotkin subtly signaled his suspicion. Ivan, always quick to catch on, stood and stretched, feigning casual interest in the house. "Mind if I take a look around?" he asked. Zdansky's smile was tight. "Of course. Make yourselves at home." Ivan wandered towards the stairs, his footsteps deliberately loud on the creaking wood. As he climbed, the floorboards groaned under his weight, and the atmosphere grew thick with anticipation. Reaching the top, he found a trapdoor leading to the attic. He paused, listening intently. Below, the group continued their tense conversation with Zdansky. Maria kept glancing towards the stairs, worry etched on her face. Upstairs, Ivan heard a faint shuffling, the unmistakable sound of hushed whispers. Carefully, he eased open the trapdoor, peering into the dimly lit attic. There, crouched among the rafters, were several men, all armed and ready, their eyes glinting in the low light. One of them noticed Ivan and raised a finger to his lips, a silent plea for quiet. Ivan's heart raced, but he understood immediately. These men were not here by chance. They were Zdansky's comrades, hidden away and poised to strike if necessary. Ivan backed down the stairs as quietly as he could, returning to the group with a forced smile. "Nothing up there but dust and cobwebs," he said, though his eyes met Sirotkin's with a meaningful glance. Sirotkin nodded subtly, understanding the unspoken message. The tension in the room thickened, an invisible thread stretched taut, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. As night fell, the atmosphere around the house grew even more oppressive. The once comforting warmth of the fire now seemed to cast eerie, flickering shadows that danced ominously on the walls. The group couldn't shake the feeling that they were being suffocated by the forest, as if it had a will of its own, closing in around them. Maria, sensitive to the slightest shifts in her surroundings, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Something's wrong," she whispered, clutching her crucifix tightly. "This place. It feels like it's cut off from the world." Sirotkin nodded, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed their surroundings. The windows, though they showed the dark forest outside, seemed almost like portals to another realm, distorting the view and making the outside world appear even more alien and threatening. Sergei, ever the skeptic, scoffed. "You're letting your imagination get the best of you," he said, though his own eyes darted nervously around the room. But it wasn't just Maria who felt it. There was a palpable sense of isolation, as if the house was a bubble, separated from reality. The usual sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, nocturnal animals, were eerily absent, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. "Listen," Sirotkin said, his voice low. "The forest. It's too quiet." The realization hit them all at once. The familiar sounds of the night had been swallowed by an oppressive silence. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting. Suddenly, a loud thud came from upstairs, followed by the sound of muffled voices. The group tensed, their eyes snapping to the ceiling. Zdansky stood, his face a mask of calm, but there was a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. "I believe it's time for you all to rest," he said smoothly. "We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow." But rest was the last thing on anyone's mind. Sirotkin, Ivan, and the others exchanged wary glances, their unease growing with each passing moment. They knew they couldn't trust Zdansky, not completely. The presence of his hidden comrades, the strange atmosphere of the house, had all pointed to a sinister truth that lurked just beneath the surface. As they settled into their makeshift sleeping arrangements, the oppressive silence pressed down on them. The flickering candlelight cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of fabric, set their nerves on edge. In the dead of night, as the group lay in uneasy rest, Sirotkin kept one eye open, his hand never straying far from his revolver. He knew that whatever secrets this house held, they were far from safe. The forest, the ataman, the hidden men in the attic, everything was a threat, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And in the oppressive darkness, the group could only wait, their hearts pounding in anticipation of the unknown horrors that might come with the dawn. The path that had guided them into the depths of the forest seemed to vanish before their very eyes. One moment, it was there, a winding trail through the dense foliage, the only lifeline connecting them to civilization. And the next moment, it was gone, as if swallowed by the ominous shadows that lurked between the trees. Sirotkin's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the empty space where the path had been. It was impossible, inconceivable, and yet there it was, their only route of escape, vanished without a trace. Panic surged through the group, a primal fear clawing at their minds as they realized they were well and truly lost in the heart of the forest. Maria clutched her crucifix tightly, muttering prayers under her breath, as if hoping for divine intervention. Sergei cursed vehemently, his voice echoing through the silent woods, a desperate attempt to break through the suffocating atmosphere of dread that had descended upon them. They searched frantically for any sign of the path, but the forest seemed to mock their efforts, the trees standing tall and impassive, their branches casting long, eerie shadows in the fading light. It was as if the very earth itself had conspired against them, trapping them in its grasp with no hope of escape. Sirotkin knew they had to keep moving, had to find some way out of this nightmare, but with each passing moment, their chances grew slimmer. The forest was a labyrinth, a maze of twisted paths and hidden dangers, and they were nothing more than lost souls wandering its depths. As night fell and darkness descended upon the forest, the group huddled together, their fear a palpable presence in the air. They had ventured into the unknown, and now the unknown had swallowed them whole, leaving them to face whatever horrors lay in wait in the shadows. A sense of unease hung heavy in the air as Zadansky and the commissar exchanged cryptic glances, their words laden with hidden meaning. There was a tension between them, a silent battle of wills that played out beneath the surface as they danced around the truth, each wary of revealing too much. Sirotkin watched them carefully, his instincts screaming at him to beware. There was something about the Ataman's demeanor, a coldness in his eyes that belied his outward charm. And the commissar, there was a steely resolve in his gaze, a determination to uncover the secrets that lurked in the depths of the forest. As they spoke, their voices low and guarded, the atmosphere grew charged with electricity, a sense of impending doom that hung over them like a dark cloud. It was as if the forest itself was listening, its ancient trees whispering secrets that only they could hear. Maria shivered, a chill running down her spine as she felt the weight of their words. There was danger here, she knew it deep in her bones, a threat that lurked just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Sergei scoffed at their warnings, his bravado masking the fear that gnawed at his insides. But even he couldn't shake the feeling that they were treading on thin ice, that one wrong move could plunge them into the abyss of the unknown. As the night wore on and the darkness deepened, the group found themselves on edge, their nerves frayed by the tension that surrounded them. They knew they were being watched, knew that every step they took brought them closer to the heart of the forest, where untold horrors awaited. But still they pressed on, driven by a desperate need to survive, to uncover the truth that lay hidden in the shadows. And as they ventured deeper into the darkness, they knew that they were teetering on the edge of a precipice, one wrong move away from oblivion. The Ataman's demeanor grew increasingly erratic, his words laced with ambiguity and hidden agendas that sent shivers down the spines of those around him. Sirotkin and his companions exchanged wary glances, their trust in the Ataman wavering as they struggled to decipher his true intentions. There was something off about the way he moved, the way his eyes darted furtively around the room, as if searching for unseen threats, and his words cryptic and veiled, like a snake coiled in the grass, waiting to strike at the slightest provocation. Maria clutched her rosary tightly, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had trusted the Ataman, had believed him to be their salvation in this dark and treacherous forest. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she saw only shadows lurking in the depths, hiding secrets that she dared not uncover. Sergei's hand strayed to the hilt of his knife, his gaze fixed on the Ataman's every move with a mix of suspicion and apprehension. He had always been wary of authority, of those who wielded power with impunity, and now his worst fears seemed to be coming true before his very eyes. As the tension in the room reached a fever pitch, Sirotkin knew that they were standing on the precipice of disaster. The Ataman's true intentions remained shrouded in mystery, his actions casting doubt on everything they thought they knew about him. And as they watched him closely, they knew that the path ahead would be fraught with peril, with no guarantee of safe passage. A sense of dread washed over the group as the horses, usually stalwart companions in their journey through the forest, began to whinny and stamp their hooves in agitation. The sound echoed through the night like a warning, a harbinger of impending doom that sent shivers down their spines. Sirotkin rushed to calm the animals, his hands shaking as he tried to soothe their frayed nerves. But it was no use, the horses seemed to sense something lurking just beyond the safety of their makeshift shelter, something dark and malevolent that threatened to tear them apart. And then, from beyond the walls of their refuge, came the sound of pounding fists and angry voices, demanding entry with a ferocity that sent chills down their spines. Maria clutched her crucifix tightly, her prayers whispered fervently into the darkness as she prayed for deliverance from whatever evil lurked outside. Sergei brandished his knife, his eyes blazing with defiance as he prepared to defend his comrades against whatever horrors awaited them. He had faced danger before, had stared death in the face, and laughed in its grim visage, but never had he felt such a sense of dread as he did in that moment. As the pounding on the door grew louder, Sirotkin knew that they were running out of time. They were trapped, surrounded by enemies on all sides, with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. And as the door creaked ominously under the weight of their assailants, he knew that they were about to face the greatest challenge of their lives, a battle for survival against an unknown and implacable foe. The forest, once a sanctuary of greenery and life, had transformed into a labyrinth of terror, where danger lurked behind every shadow and every rustle of leaves seemed to whisper of impending doom. It began with the disappearance of the trail, a lifeline snuffed out in an instant, leaving the group stranded in the heart of the wilderness. Sirotkin and his companions searched frantically for any sign of the path, but it was as if the very earth had swallowed it whole, leaving them adrift in a sea of uncertainty. And then, as if mocking their desperation, came the disappearance's first one, then another, until their numbers dwindled like candles in the wind. Fear gnawed at their hearts as they realized that they were not alone in the forest, that some unseen force was stalking them, picking them off one by one with ruthless efficiency. They huddled together, their eyes darting nervously around the darkness, searching for any sign of their vanished comrades, but finding only silence and shadows in return. Maria clung to her rosary, her prayers a desperate plea for salvation in the face of overwhelming darkness. Sergei cursed and spat, his bravado a thin veneer over the terror that threatened to consume him. And Sirotkin, ever the rationalist, struggled to make sense of the chaos unfolding around them, his mind racing with possibilities even as his heart trembled with fear. But no matter how hard they tried to rationalize it, there was no denying the truth. They were trapped in a nightmare of their own making, with no hope of escape and no way to fight back against the darkness that surrounded them. The forest seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, its ancient trees looming like silent sentinels over the hapless group as they stumbled blindly through the undergrowth. Every sound, every shadow sent a shiver down their spines, as if the very air itself was alive with whispered secrets and unseen threats. As they pressed on, the signs of danger grew more pronounced, a twisted branch here, a footprint there, each one a silent warning of the perils that lay ahead. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stumbled upon a patch of trampled grass, the telltale sign of a struggle that had taken place in the darkness. Sergei's eyes narrowed as he examined the ground, his senses on high alert for any hint of danger. He had faced death before, had stared into the abyss and laughed in its face, but never had he felt such a sense of foreboding as he did in that moment. Sirotkin, ever the skeptic, tried to rationalize the signs, to find a logical explanation for the terror that gripped them. But deep down, he knew that there was something unnatural at work in the forest, something ancient and primal that defied all reason. And as they ventured deeper into the heart of the wilderness, the signs of danger grew more ominous, more pronounced, until it felt as if they were walking straight into the jaws of hell itself. But still they pressed on, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth, to unravel the mystery that lay hidden in the depths of the forest, no matter the cost. In the suffocating embrace of the forest's darkness, suspicion became a contagion, spreading through the group like wildfire as each member grappled with their own fears and doubts. Every rustle of leaves, every whispered conversation, fueled the growing sense of paranoia that threatened to tear them apart from within. Sirotkin cast wary glances at his companions, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion and doubt. Was it Maria, with her fervent prayers and haunted eyes, who harbored secret motives beneath her facade of piety? Or perhaps it was Sergei, with his rough demeanor and quick temper, who hid a darker truth behind his bravado. Maria, in turn, eyed Sirotkin with unease, her fingers tracing the beads of her rosary as she struggled to reconcile the man she knew with the shadow of doubt that now clouded her perception. And Sergei, ever the skeptic, watched them both with a wary eye, his hand never far from the hilt of his knife as he searched for any sign of treachery. As the night wore on and the darkness pressed in around them, their suspicions grew ever more pronounced, each member of the group a potential threat in the eyes of the others. And as they huddled together for warmth and safety, they knew that they were not only fighting against the unknown forces that lurked in the forest, but against the darkness that dwelled within their own hearts. In the heart of the forest, where reality blurred and shadows danced in the moonlight, the line between truth and illusion grew ever more tenuous. It was in this surreal landscape that the group encountered the first of many strange figures, a mirage of a girl, her form ethereal and indistinct in the darkness. Maria gasped in disbelief as she caught sight of the apparition, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture of shock and fear. Was it a trick of the light, a figment of her fevered imagination, or something more sinister lurking in the depths of the forest? Sirotkin's brow furrowed as he studied the girl, his mind racing with possibilities. Was she a lost soul, doomed to wander the forest for all eternity? Or perhaps she was a harbinger of doom, a warning of the horrors that awaited them in the darkness. And Sergei, ever the pragmatist, scoffed at the sight, dismissing it as nothing more than a trick of the mind. But even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him like a shroud, as if the forest itself was alive with unseen eyes watching their every move. As they pressed on through the darkness, the memory of the girl lingered in their minds, a haunting reminder of the terrors that lurked just beyond the edge of their perception. And as they ventured deeper into the heart of the forest, they knew that they were not only facing the unknown dangers that lay ahead, but the mysteries that dwelled within themselves. With each passing moment, the forest seemed to close in around them, its dark embrace suffocating and relentless. Every snap of a twig, every distant howl of a beast, only served to heighten the sense of impending doom that hung over the group like a shroud. Sirotkin's hands trembled as he clutched his rifle, his nerves frayed to the breaking point by the unrelenting pressure of the unknown. Maria's prayers grew more fervent, her voice rising in a desperate plea for deliverance from the horrors that surrounded them. And Sergei, ever the stoic, felt the icy grip of fear tightening around his heart, threatening to overwhelm him with its suffocating embrace. As they stumbled through the darkness, each step weighed down by the burden of uncertainty. The tension between them grew palpable, a living thing that writhed and twisted in the shadows. Every word, every glance, was fraught with meaning, laden with the unspoken fear that threatened to tear them apart from within. And as they huddled together for warmth and safety, their minds awash with doubt and suspicion, they knew that they were on the brink of collapse, teetering on the edge of a precipice from which there could be no return. In the oppressive silence of the forest, suspicion hung heavy in the air, a noose tightening around the group's collective throat. Each member eyed the other with wary distrust, their minds racing with dark thoughts and hidden motives. Sirotkin's gaze flickered from face to face, searching for any sign of betrayal in the eyes of his companions. Maria's hands shook as she clutched her rosary, her prayers a desperate plea for salvation from the unseen horrors that lurked in the darkness. And Sergei, ever the cynic, watched them all with a cold detachment, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion and doubt. As the tension reached its breaking point, the group found themselves teetering on the edge of chaos, each member consumed by their own fears and insecurities. Every word, every gesture, was scrutinized and dissected as they struggled to discern friend from foe in the shifting shadows of the forest. And as the night wore on and the darkness pressed in around them, they knew that they were fighting a losing battle, trapped in a web of paranoia and mistrust from which there could be no escape. As the night wore on and the forest closed in around them like a vice, the group found themselves grasping at straws for any semblance of rationality in the face of overwhelming fear. It was in this desperate search for answers that they turned to the realm of the mystical, seeking solace in explanations that defied the bounds of reason. Maria spoke in hushed tones of ancient legends and forgotten lore, her voice trembling with a mixture of awe and terror as she recounted tales of spirits and demons that haunted the depths of the forest. Sirotkin nodded solemnly, his thoughts drifting to the strange sensations that had plagued him since they had entered the woods, wondering if perhaps there was some truth to the old woman's words. Sergei scoffed at their superstitions, dismissing them as nothing more than the ramblings of frightened minds grasping for meaning in the face of the unknown. But even he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him like a shroud, as if the very air around them was alive with unseen forces that defied explanation. And so, as they huddled together in the darkness, their minds awash with tales of ancient curses and vengeful spirits, they found themselves teetering on the edge of belief, unsure of what lurked in the shadows just beyond their sight. In the stillness of the night, when the darkness pressed in around them like a suffocating blanket, the group encountered a creature that seemed to materialize from the very depths of their nightmares, a being that bore a striking resemblance to the mythical Leshy of Slavic folklore. Its eyes gleamed with an otherworldly light as it emerged from the shadows, its form twisted and distorted like a specter from another realm. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the creature from the stories of her childhood, her heart hammering in her chest with a primal fear that threatened to consume her. Sirotkin's grip tightened on his rifle, his mind reeling with disbelief at the sight before him. Was this truly the stuff of legends come to life, or merely a trick of the mind brought on by the oppressive darkness of the forest? And Sergei, ever the skeptic, watched the creature with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, his rational mind struggling to make sense of the impossible. But as the creature drew closer, its presence looming large in the eerie stillness of the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something far beyond their comprehension. And so, as the creature advanced with slow, deliberate steps, the group found themselves paralyzed with fear, their minds racing with questions that had no answers. For in that moment, they realized that they were not merely confronting a creature of myth and legend, but the unknown terrors that lurked in the darkest recesses of their own minds. As the darkness of the forest enveloped them like a cloak of shadows, desperation drove one member of the group to a harrowing decision. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with dread, he resolved to take drastic measures in a desperate bid for salvation. The sound of splashing water echoed through the silent woods as he led the unsuspecting horse to the edge of a murky pond, the surface rippling with an eerie, unnatural stillness. His mind raced with visions of the horrors that lurked in the darkness, his thoughts consumed by the need to protect his companions from the unseen threat that stalked them. With a prayer on his lips and fear gnawing at his soul, he pushed the horse into the water, its panicked whinnies drowned out by the cacophony of his own racing heartbeat. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the creature thrashed and struggled against the icy embrace of the pond, its eyes wide with terror as it fought for its life. But as the seconds stretched into eternity, the true horror of his actions began to sink in, filling him with a sickening sense of guilt and remorse. Had he truly saved his companions from danger, or had he condemned an innocent creature to a watery grave in a futile attempt to escape the darkness that surrounded them? In the grip of fear and desperation, the bonds of friendship and camaraderie strained to their breaking point, as the group found themselves locked in a battle for survival against the encroaching darkness. With each passing moment, the tension in the air grew thicker, suffocating them with the weight of their own fear and uncertainty. Suspicion festered like a poison in their hearts, driving them to turn on one another in a desperate bid to protect themselves from the horrors that lurked in the shadows. Fists clenched and voices raised, they squared off against each other in a primal display of raw emotion and primal instinct. For in that moment, logic and reason were cast aside in favor of the basest of human impulses, the need to survive at any cost. But even as they battled against each other, a small voice in the back of their minds whispered a grim truth: they were not each other's enemies, but pawns in a much larger game, mere playthings in the hands of forces beyond their comprehension. And so, as they fought tooth and nail for their very survival, they knew that only by standing together against the encroaching darkness could they hope to emerge from the nightmarish depths of the forest alive. The forest, shrouded in an oppressive silence, bore witness to an unfathomable tragedy as the group found themselves spiraling into the depths of horror. In the flickering shadows cast by the moonlight, tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to erupt into a maelstrom of chaos and despair. It was amidst this atmosphere of dread and uncertainty that fate dealt its cruel hand, as a single moment of recklessness forever altered the course of their journey. In a haze of panic and confusion, a sudden movement, a misplaced step, and the chilling sound of metal meeting flesh echoed through the night. Sirotkin, his hands stained crimson with guilt, stood frozen in shock as the lifeless body of Zeltkov crumpled to the forest floor, his eyes wide with disbelief at the irreversible tragedy that had unfolded before him. In that haunting moment, the line between friend and foe blurred into obscurity, leaving the group reeling in horror at the fragility of their own mortality. As the echoes of their screams faded into the night, a profound sense of dread settled over them like a suffocating shroud, casting a pall of darkness over their once hopeful spirits. For in that moment they knew that no amount of remorse or regret could undo the irreversible consequences of their actions, forever staining their souls with the blood of the fallen. Amidst the gloom of the forest, where shadows danced like specters in the moonlight, an enigma unfolded, a puzzle with no clear solution, a mystery that defied rational explanation. It was within the confines of a dilapidated shed, its weathered timbers groaning in protest against the passage of time, that the unexpected occurred. As the group huddled together, their nerves frayed and their spirits battered by the horrors of the night, a figure materialized from the darkness, a specter from the past, resurrected in a flurry of whispers and half-forgotten memories. Grishka, the nephew of old Matvey, stood before them like a ghost from another time, his presence a haunting reminder of the secrets that lay buried beneath the forest floor. Clad in tattered rags and bearing the weight of untold sorrow in his sunken eyes, he spoke of truths long forgotten and mysteries yet to be unraveled. But as the group stared in disbelief at the apparition before them, a sense of unease settled over them like a shroud, for Grishka's sudden appearance raised more questions than it answered. From whence had he come, and what dark secrets did he carry with him? Only time would tell as the night wore on, each passing moment bringing them closer to the heart of the forest's mysteries. In the eerie silence of the forest, where the trees whispered ancient secrets and the shadows danced with unseen entities, the group bore witness to a phenomenon that defied all logic and reason. As the tension thickened like a suffocating fog, the crack of a gunshot shattered the stillness, sending shockwaves rippling through the night. It was Bagor, his eyes ablaze with a mixture of fear and determination, who took aim at the mysterious woman who had appeared before them. But to their astonishment, she seemed impervious to harm, her form flickering like a mirage in the moonlight as the bullet passed harmlessly through her ethereal figure. As the group stood dumbfounded, grappling with the implications of what they had just witnessed, the woman vanished into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but a lingering sense of unease and bewilderment. For in that moment, they realized that they were not alone in the forest, that unseen forces, both malevolent and inscrutable, lurked in the darkness, watching their every move with bated breath. As the night wore on, and the darkness pressed in around them like a tangible presence, the group found themselves plunged into a nightmare from which there seemed to be no escape. It was Bagor, driven by a primal instinct to unravel the mysteries of the forest, who ventured forth into the murky depths of the marsh, his footsteps muffled by the soggy earth beneath his feet. But as he pressed on, his resolve faltered, and the suffocating embrace of the marsh threatened to swallow him whole. With each step, the ground grew increasingly treacherous, sucking him deeper into its clutches with a relentless hunger that knew no bounds. And then, in a heartbeat, he was gone, engulfed by the inky blackness of the marsh, his cries for help swallowed by the void. Left behind in his wake, Sirotkin stood frozen in horror, his mind reeling with the implications of what had just transpired. For in that moment he realized that the forest was not simply a place of darkness and shadows, but a realm of unfathomable terror where nightmares walked among men. In the heart of the ominous forest, where every rustle of leaves seemed to portend doom, the group found themselves thrust into a desperate struggle for survival. Despite their differences in beliefs and backgrounds, they were united by a common goal to make it through the night alive. With each passing moment, the specter of danger loomed ever larger, casting a pall of fear and uncertainty over their ragtag assembly. Yet in the face of overwhelming odds, they discovered an unexpected strength and unity, a fragile alliance forged in the crucible of adversity. Amidst the darkness and despair, bonds were formed that transcended the barriers of distrust and suspicion that had once divided them. For in the crucible of survival, they learned that true strength lay not in solitary defiance, but in the collective resilience of those who dared to stand together against the encroaching shadows. As the night wore on, and the forces of darkness closed in around them like a suffocating shroud, the Ataman and the Commissar found themselves reluctantly thrust into an uneasy alliance. Despite their bitter enmity and ideological differences, they were bound together by a shared imperative to navigate the treacherous labyrinth of the forest and emerge unscathed on the other side. With every step they took, their footsteps echoed with the weight of unspoken tensions and unresolved grievances. Yet, in the crucible of adversity, they discovered a common ground of fragile truce born of necessity, rather than trust. Forced to set aside their animosity in the face of a greater threat, they found themselves grappling with a newfound sense of camaraderie, a fleeting glimmer of unity in a world fraught with discord and division. And as they pressed on through the darkness, they knew that their survival depended not on their ability to overcome each other, but on their willingness to stand together against the encroaching tide of darkness. In the murky depths of the swamp, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred into obscurity, the group found themselves ensnared in a web of enigma and dread. Shadows lurked in every corner, and whispers of unseen horrors haunted their every step. As night descended like a shroud over the forsaken landscape, a series of inexplicable murders sent shockwaves of terror rippling through their midst. Each victim met their demise under circumstances too bizarre to comprehend, strange symbols etched into their flesh, and eerie whispers echoing in the darkness. With each passing hour, the sense of unease deepened, and trust among the group frayed like worn threads. Suspicion hung heavy in the air, casting a pall of paranoia over their already tenuous alliance. For in the heart of the swamp, where reality itself seemed to warp and bend to the will of unseen forces, even the most steadfast bonds of camaraderie could be torn asunder by the specter of fear. In the midst of the encroaching darkness, where every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking menace, the Commissar's cunning intellect became their greatest asset. With a deft hand and a silver tongue, he wove a tangled web of deception, manipulating the Ataman's perceptions to his advantage. Feigning confidence in the face of uncertainty, the Commissar planted seeds of doubt in the Ataman's mind, sowing discord within their ranks like a malignant weed. Through artful misdirection and carefully crafted half-truths, he convinced his erstwhile adversary that he possessed a cache of ammunition for his revolver, a ruse designed to instill a false sense of security and bolster their fragile alliance. Yet beneath the veneer of camaraderie, the seeds of mistrust continued to germinate, their roots entwined with the very fabric of their survival. For in a world where deception was the coin of the realm, the line between friend and foe blurred into insignificance, and the only certainty was the ever-present specter of betrayal. Amidst the suffocating gloom of the swamp, where treachery lurked behind every shadow, the fragile truce between the Commissar and the Ataman teetered on the brink of collapse. Despite their reluctant alliance born of necessity, the specter of past grievances lingered like a malignant curse, festering beneath the surface of their uneasy camaraderie. Beneath the facade of cooperation, a chasm of resentment yawned wide, fueled by years of rivalry and mutual distrust. Each word exchanged was laden with subtext, every gesture tinged with veiled hostility, as they navigated the treacherous waters of their tenuous partnership. For in the heart of the swamp, where betrayal lurked around every corner, even the semblance of unity could not staunch the festering wounds of old enmity. As the noose of uncertainty tightened around their necks, and the specter of impending doom loomed ever larger on the horizon, Siroktin and Zadansky found themselves at a crossroads. With the darkness closing in around them, and the unknown threat lurking just beyond the veil of shadows, they were forced to confront the bitter reality of their predicament. In a moment fraught with tension and uncertainty, they made the fateful decision to part ways, each venturing into the murky depths of the swamp alone. Their parting words hung heavy in the air, tinged with regret and resignation, as they faced the daunting prospect of survival in a world where danger lurked around every corner. Yet even as they went their separate ways, the lingering question remained: how would they overcome the myriad challenges that lay ahead and reconcile their differences in the face of an inscrutable foe? Only time would tell, as they ventured deeper into the heart of darkness, where the line between reality and nightmare blurred into obscurity, and the true nature of their fate remained shrouded in mystery. In the oppressive gloom of the swamp, where the air hung heavy with the stench of decay and the whispers of unseen horrors, Siroctin found himself ensnared in a deadly game of cat and mouse. As he navigated the treacherous terrain, a sudden onslaught shattered the eerie silence of frenzied attack, launched by the deranged commissar himself. Caught off guard by the ferocity of the assault, Siroctin grappled with the realization that the very man sworn to protect them had succumbed to the madness that lurked within the swamp's fetid embrace. In the flickering light of the moon, his assailant's features contorted into a grotesque mask of insanity, devoid of all reason or humanity. With the specter of madness looming over them like a shadowy shroud, Siroctin and the Ataman found themselves thrust into a desperate struggle for survival. United by the direness of their circumstances, they cast aside their differences and banded together in a bid to repel the onslaught of the deranged commissar, who lusted after the elusive golden ingot. Armed with nothing but their wits and sheer determination, they squared off against their unhinged adversary, their hearts pounding in unison as they braced themselves for the inevitable clash. Each blow struck reverberated through the murky depths of the swamp as they fought tooth and nail against the encroaching tide of madness that threatened to engulf them all. In the crucible of chaos, alliances forged in fire emerged, as Siroctin and the Ataman stood shoulder to shoulder, facing down the maelstrom of madness that raged around them. For in the heart of darkness, where sanity teetered on the brink of oblivion, the true test of their mettle awaited an ordeal from which only the strongest would emerge unscathed. In the dim light of the swamp, where shadows danced with malevolent intent, and every rustle of the reeds echoed like a sinister whisper, the commissar found himself cornered by the encroaching madness. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with dread, he knew that there could be no escape from the relentless onslaught of the deranged official, driven to the brink of insanity by forces beyond his control. As the murky waters closed in around him, the commissar had no choice but to draw his pistol, its cold metal glinting ominously in the pale moonlight. With each shot fired, he felt the weight of his conscience grow heavier, each bullet a damning testament to the price of survival in a world consumed by madness and despair. As Siroctin trudged through the unforgiving marshlands, his weary limbs weighed down by the burden of his ordeal, he could feel the inexorable march of time slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. With each passing moment, the line between reality and nightmare blurred, as he grappled with the haunting specters that lurked in the murky depths of the swamp. Exhausted and disoriented, he sought refuge in the shelter of the tangled undergrowth, his mind awash with uncertainty and fear. Alone in the darkness, with only the mournful croak of the swamp's denizens for company, he braced himself for the long night ahead, knowing that the true horrors of the marsh awaited him with bated breath. As dusk descended upon the desolate marshlands, casting long shadows over the stagnant waters, a macabre discovery sent shivers down the spines of the weary travelers. A corpse, its pallid form twisted in a grotesque mockery of life, lay half submerged in the murky depths, a silent testament to the unfathomable horrors that lurked beneath the surface. But it was not only death that haunted the fetid waters. Strange bubbles rose from the depths, their iridescent sheen dancing in the fading light like whispers of a malevolent presence. With each passing moment, the air grew thick with an oppressive sense of foreboding, as though the very fabric of reality were unraveling before their eyes. Amidst the tangled maze of twisted roots and tangled foliage, Siroctin stumbled upon a secluded islet shrouded in an aura of ominous silence. Ancient symbols, etched into the gnarled bark of long dead trees, spoke of a time long forgotten, when the swamp was a realm of untold mysteries and dark secrets. But it was not the faded runes that drew Siroctin's gaze, but rather the glint of gold that caught the dying light, hidden amidst the tangled undergrowth. For in the heart of the swamp, where the lines between legend and reality blurred, lurked the promise of untold riches and unspeakable horrors, beckoning the unwary to their doom. As the moon cast its eerie glow upon the mist-shrouded marshes, a profound realization dawned upon the weary soul of the commissar. No longer could he deny the palpable presence of arcane forces that pulsed through the very fabric of the swamp, weaving a tapestry of enigma and intrigue that defied mortal comprehension. Shadows danced upon the murky waters, whispering secrets of forgotten epochs and untold mysteries, beckoning him into the heart of the unknown. In the depths of the night, as the veil between worlds grew thin, Siruktin felt a stirring within his soul, a primal call that resonated with the ancient rhythms of the swamp. Though fear gnawed at his heart like a ravenous beast, he knew that he could no longer resist the siren song of the marsh's enigmatic guardian. With each step, the mire claimed him, drawing him ever closer to the elusive figure that lurked amidst the shadows. And as dawn broke upon the horizon, casting its ethereal light upon the mist-wreathed landscape, Siruktin stood before the Lord of the Bog, a being of primordial power and boundless wisdom, whose gaze pierced the veil of mortality and gazed into the depths of his very soul. In that moment, amidst the whispers of the marsh and the haunting cries of the night, Siruktin knew that his fate was sealed, an eternal servant to the mysteries of the swamp, forever bound to the enigmatic allure of the Bog King.